All right, please create a new notes page called Part 2 Social Solutions with today's date, and then when you are done taking notes, you will pull out the need to knows. You should have a need to know for every uppercase letter. So the focus is racism and white supremacy. Those are the two problems that existed at the time, and some of those problems will have solutions. So Roman numeral 1, African Americans are ignored. White supremacy and progressives, there's a belief that progressives are those people trying to do progressive things at the time of the progressive era. We're actually acting out of white supremacy or assuming that white culture or the dominant culture was the best and ideal culture that everybody would want to live like. Challenges facing African Americans as a result were ignored by the government. And progressives like muckrakers and activists do very little for African Americans. So they ignored segregation in the South and racist violence in the North, like the Red Summer. And they were concerned with reforms they thought benefited everyone, not just one group. But as we know from 2020, the fact that African Americans and the ideals being denied to them was ignored would have a lasting impact on the whole of American society, culture, and history. Number 2, problems African Americans faced. 2 problems African Americans faced. One problem was African Americans were being denied economic opportunities or jobs. Think of like sharecropping and how debilitating that was and the cycle of poverty that it led to. The other was being denied civil rights. So there was a debate within the African American community of which one of these should be addressed first or which one was more important. Both are important, of course, but which one should be dealt with first? Our first person is Booker T. Washington and his life and legacy. He was an educator and civil rights leader. He believed that economic success or jobs was the key to African American success and civil rights would come later. In 1856, he was born in Virginia to 1915, so he grew up in the South. And he opened the Tuskegee Institute in 1881, which is in Alabama. And it was a school for educating and training African Americans. And the focus was to teach African Americans a trade so they could make a living, have economic independence, learn how to farm, do construction, sewing, etc. And the fact that he grew up in the South is important. He saw segregation as a reality that wasn't going away anytime soon. So he thought economic independence is most important. So BTW will be Booker T. Washington. Solution for social problems facing African Americans. Washington wanted more economic opportunities for African Americans. He argued blacks needed to learn industrial skills for better wages. He accepted segregation as something that was going to be around for a long time, so jobs should come first. And he believed in establishing economic security for all African Americans before obtaining political and social equality or civil rights. So jobs first. Then you have a guy named W.E.B. Du Bois and his life and legacy. He's an African American activist and educator. He was born in 1868 in Massachusetts, so not in the South. Maybe did not see segregation to the same extent as Washington. And he lived till 1963. He was the first African American to earn a PhD from Harvard. And that's important too because he was involved in higher education. And he wanted African Americans to succeed in education and politics, not in a trade. Not focus on learning a trade. And started the NAACP, or the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And this ensured the political, educational, social, and economic equality of all persons and eliminate race-based discrimination. That was the focus of the group that he started. We'll talk more about that later on. So Du Bois' solution for problems facing African Americans is he wanted civil rights for African Americans. And he criticized Washington's approach, which was jobs first. He wanted civil rights first. And he believed in something called the talented tenth, and that is the idea that a talented African American should seek and receive opportunities in higher education, and these educated few, or the talented tenth, could lead blacks to seek and fight for political and social rights. So he wanted African Americans to get those higher education opportunities, not necessarily learn a trade. So a new civil rights organization is called the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. 1908, Du Bois founded the NAACP, and it sought to abolish all forms of segregation and increase educational opportunities for African American children. And in 1920, the nation's largest civil rights organization was the NAACP with 100,000 plus members. Here's a picture on the day it was opened or close to. All right, thank you for listening.